Hi, I'm Sasha Ayad. It's April 2025, and here's what's on my mind this month. The White Lotus. Frank wants to be an Asian girl. What does this mean? On episode 5, season 3 of The White Lotus, called Full Moon Party, there's a truly breathtaking scene that has been discussed with great interest by audiences all over the place. And it turns out it's not just the gender world that has been gripped by this remarkable monologue. Today we're going to watch this scene together in its full glory, F-bombs and all, sex talk and all, and I'll walk you through 3 very different perspectives or lenses that we can use to understand and interpret this unusual sexual confession. Viewer discretion is advised for today. If you're new here, again, my name is Sasha Ayad, and I'm an adolescent therapist who since 2016 has focused exclusively on gender, personal identity, and the socially mediated elements of things like self-diagnoses. Now, this YouTube channel is largely for parents who want to support their children while preventing a rush into medicalization. But I also discuss cultural issues related to identity, gender, and transition. First, let me set the scene if you've never watched The White Lotus. I think it's a brilliant show. It's created, written, and directed by Mike White. And it's essentially about the mysteries and dramas that unfold at a luxury resort chain called The White Lotus. Each season takes place in a different resort location, and this season takes place in Thailand. One of the main characters we meet is a middle-aged man named Rick. Now, his free-spirited younger girlfriend, Chelsea, thinks that they're just in Thailand for a vacation. But actually, Rick has come to Thailand to find the man who ruined his life by killing his father many decades ago. So Rick leaves Chelsea behind at the coastal resort, the White Lotus, and then he travels solo to Bangkok to reconnect with a friend from his past named Frank. Now, we don't know exactly how Frank and Rick originally knew each other, but it's implied that they were into some shady business long ago. And we get the sense that Rick is seeking out Frank's help for something potentially illegal. Now, the following scene takes place when the two meet up at a bar to catch up over a drink. Rick is a little puzzled when Frank just orders a chamomile tea, so he asks him about it. And Frank begins to explain his sobriety. And as you'll see, Rick is completely flabbergasted by what he hears next.
Well, you know, I moved here because I I had to leave the States, but I picked Thailand because I always had a thing for Asian girls, you know. And when I got here, I was like a kid in a candy store. If you got money, no attachments, nothing to do, I started partying. Yeah. It got wild. I was picking up girls every night, always different ones, petite ones, chubby ones, older ones, sometimes multiple ladies a night. I was out of control. I became insatiable. Yeah. And, after about 1,000 nights like that, you start to lose it. I started wondering, where am I going with this? Why do I feel this need to fuck all these women? What is desire? The form of this cute Asian girl, why does it have such a grip on me? Because she's the opposite of me? Is she gonna complete me in some way? I realized I could fuck a million women, I'd still never be satisfied. Maybe what I really want is to be one of these Asian girls.
Really?
You know?
Not really.
No, really.
Really?
So, one night I took home some girl, turned out to be a lady boy, which I'd done before, but this time, instead of fucking the lady boy fucked me. And it was kind of magical. And I got in my head that what I really wanted was to be one of these Asian girls getting fucked by me and to feel that. So I put out an ad looking for a white guy my age come over and fuck me. found a guy who looked a lot like me. And then I put on some lingerie and perfume, made myself look like one of these girls. And I thought I looked pretty hot. And then this guy came over and railed the shit out of me. And then I got addicted to that. Some nights 3, 4 guys would come over and rail the shit out of me. Some I even had to pay. And at the same time, I'd hire an Asian girl to just sit there and watch the whole thing. I'd look in her eyes while some guy was fucking me, and I'd think, I am her, and I'm fucking me. Hey, we all have our Achilles heel, man, you know. Where does it come from? Why are some of us attracted to the opposite form and some of us the same? Sex is a poetic act. It's a metaphor. Metaphor for what? Are we our forms? Am I a middle-aged white guy on the inside too? Or inside? Could I be an Asian girl?
Right. I don't know.
Guess I was trying to fuck my way to the answer. And then I realized I gotta stop the drugs, the girls, trying to be a girl. I got into Buddhism, which is all about, spirit versus form, detaching from self, getting off the never-ending carousel of lust and suffering. Being sober isn't so hard. Being celibate, though, I still miss that buzzy, man.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, I have been watching The White Lotus since season 1, and I think it's some of the best writing, the most interesting characters, and really intriguing relationship dynamics of any show out there right now. And when this particular scene came on, I sat there on the edge of my seat, mouth gaping, very much like Rick, absolutely gripped by this confession. I think the writing is so damn good because the emotional tone of the scene is so strong, but the show isn't telling you what to think. There's nothing on the nose about this monologue at all. It's completely raw. And it's also delivered with an unapologetic, matter-of-factness, and ends with Frank's cautious nostalgia because now, he explains, he practices celibacy and sobriety. Now, I've had time to rewatch and reflect on this scene since it aired, and I've allowed it to marinate, as I often say, and a lot of new things have emerged for me. So I'm really glad I took the time to kind of soak it all in before filming this reaction video. Now, first of all, as a friend pointed out, the confession is just put out there in the scene without much interpretation. Frank is completely open and vulnerable, but again, the show doesn't tell us what to make of this. They don't have psychological labels or jargon thrown around, and it's up to us, the viewer, to make sense of what we just heard. And as I said, there are different lenses we can put on to interpret this scene. There's the sexology lens, there's a philosophical lens, an existential lens, and a cinematography lens. Of course, plus many others. So for today, let's start broad, and I'm going to put on my therapist lens and share a few themes that really stood out for me. And look, this is going to get a little bit weird, but obviously there's plenty of weird content in this scene, so just stick with me here. First of all, Frank's appetite for sexual indulgence was insatiable. He said petite ones, chubby ones, older ones, multiple women a night. And the more and more women he slept with, the more he wanted, until his urge shifted into something more extreme, something even more racy and uncanny. This had a flavor of a compulsion and a very twisted and addictive pattern. Frank says that he was out of control. and he lost himself to his desires. Also, Frank is trying to merge with the mysterious and the unknowable aspects of the other, and I mean capital O, other here. Maybe he wants to more fully access the object of his fantasy from the inside out and really know her and know what it's like to be her in this sexual encounter. Frank asks this deeply profound question. He says, what is desire? What is it with this form of the cute Asian girl? Why does it have such a grip on me? Because she's the opposite of me? Is she going to complete me in some way? Now, these questions alone are so rich and interesting. Then he goes on to say, maybe what I really want is to be one of these Asian girls. Now, let's not get too distracted by the specific content here, though we'll definitely examine that in a little bit. For now, let's recognize, again, these are deeply meaningful existential questions. First, when you consider the form of someone who is as opposite of you as it gets, and then you can literally go inside of her with your body, but you still can't really merge with this other person. Your consciousness and her consciousness are separate, even when your bodies are literally intertwined. By wanting to become her, perhaps he's trying to bridge this most existential divide that we all experience with one another, the desire to merge and truly experience a oneness, a cohesion with someone else. I love when Rick looks at him in disbelief and says, "Really?" And Frank stares straight back at him in complete earnest and says, Maybe Frank is describing a yearning that we can all recognize, even if it has nothing to do with the specifics of literally wanting to become an Asian girl while having sex. Being completely untethered to others and to a sense of responsibility can be quite dangerous. Frank says that when he first got to Thailand, he had no attachments, nothing to do, and was bored, so he started partying. Having zero limitations and no cohesive mission, being led only by your hedonistic desires can be a really dangerous game to play. Now, when he talks about being fucked by a ladyboy, he said it was kind of magical, and it made him realize that he wants to be one of these Asian girls getting fucked by him. So he started having white men his age who looked like him come over and have sex with him while he was dressed up like one of these girls. When it comes to sexual encounters, I think many people are curious about what it's like to be their partner. Am I a good lover? Am I pleasing this person? I know what this feels like for me, but how does it feel for them? By having these encounters metaphorically, as the girl, Frank might be leaning into that curiosity. He said he thought he looked pretty hot, dressed up as an Asian girl, and got addicted to men railing the shit out of him, sometimes multiple times a night. He was becoming the object of his own desire, being the hot Asian girl that he was so attracted to in the first place. I wonder if this helped Frank to have a sense of control over his escalating sexual desires, by being in control of every character in the sexual encounter. Nothing left to chance, nothing left to the unpredictable and unknowable other. He wants the girl, and that wanting is under his control. Plus, he is the girl, therefore she too is now under his control. Perhaps he's trying to gain some mastery over these out-of-control sexual encounters. And further on this point, Frank would have an Asian girl come over and watch him, and he'd look into her eyes and he'd think, I am her, and I'm fucking me. Now, while he was clearly using these women for his own pleasure, Frank said that the Asian women had a grip on him. He implies a perceived loss of control. So by putting the real Asian girl in the observer chair and putting her on the periphery of this sexual encounter, I wonder if Frank felt like he was taking back control of a situation and getting some distance from his own very overwhelming desires. Did he feel more powerful here, in a way that he couldn't quite access when he was in the frenzy of his own sexual drives? Frank asked, where does it come from? Why are some of us attracted to the opposite form and some of us the same? Sex is a poetic act. It's a metaphor. A metaphor for what? Are we our forms? Am I a middle-aged white guy on the inside too? Or on the inside, could I be an Asian girl? Then he says, I guess I was trying to fuck my way to the answer. I think Frank is approaching something profound here, the idea of sex as a poetic metaphor. But then he slips right out of the metaphorical space, right back into the literal. Yes, sex is a metaphor, but he took the question of the physical form quite literally. He enacted and took on the form of the Asian woman, again, the object of his desire, without appreciating any of the metaphor. No, Frank, you're not an Asian woman on the inside because you can only ever approximate a guess at what it means to be an Asian woman based on your own perceptions, your own short-sightedness, and your own otherness from her. Frank's fantasy of the Asian woman is only a reflection of his own projections. And of course, while he's trying to meet some of these existential needs that we've been discussing through encounters with these women. Eventually, Frank says he had to stop with the drugs and the girls and the trying to be a girl. He got into Buddhism, which he says is all about spirit versus form, detaching from self, getting off the never-ending carousel of lust and suffering. Clearly these sexual escapades themselves didn't bring Frank clarity or understanding about himself or his desires. Maybe indulging these fantasies raised some important questions and even catalyzed a process for Frank. But ultimately, he sought out a structure and a framework for his life that he needed to escape this compulsive, escalating sexual fervor. He tells us, being sober isn't so hard. Being celibate, though. So what else do you see from the therapist's lens? I'd love to hear from other clinicians out there. And as I said earlier, there are many different lenses we can wear. Now, much of the discussion I saw happening in the gender world was from the sexology lens. Many people recognized in Frank's monologue a description of autogynephilia, which is the sexual fantasy and erotic drive that some men have to become a woman. Actually, it can be more than just a sexual or erotic thing, as autogynephilic experiences can be quite emotional and intense, almost like an intimate love relationship that a man has with his developing feminine persona. But for today, I think that explanation is enough of a starting place. Now, in fact, the researcher who named the phenomenon of autogynephilia, Dr. Ray Blanchard, wrote a very interesting post about this scene. Before we look at Dr. Blanchard's post, I actually need your help to keep producing videos like this. If you think this is interesting or valuable, please consider becoming a paid Substack supporter. As of now, my newsletters and What's on My Mind videos like this one are completely free, but they take significant resources to produce. So if you become a paid supporter, it really helps out me and my team. All right, so let's look at Dr. Blanchard's post on X. Since 2003, political trans activists and their allies have done everything they could to prevent the word and the concept of autogynephilia from entering public awareness. And yet, with excruciating slowness but apparent inevitability, it is doing just that. This is remarkable because, of course, Dr. Blanchard is right. The concept of autogynephilia is usually completely ignored, dismissively rejected, or downright attacked by most people who discuss gender and sexuality. On the other hand, sometimes autogynephilia, or AGP for short, is used like an accusation or slur by people in these debates. It's often referred to as a fetish or even a perversion. Now, whether or not AGP should be classified as a sexual fetish is not my area of interest today. I bring this up because this term has only just begun to trickle into the mainstream discussion, and I think it's important to know that there's no consensus about what it is or how we should regard this strange sexual experience. Now, I actually did a video about my take on AGP, which I will link below if you want to hear that after you watch this. And also, we interviewed Dr. Blanchard on Gender A Wider Lens, and there's going to be a link below for that too. Anyways, Blanchard, again, the researcher who literally coined this term, does seem to think that Frank was describing autogynephilia. I'm going to tell you if I think Frank has AGP, but before I do, I just want to explain what sources have informed my perspective here. First of all, sexology research on autogynephilia, including the work of Dr. Ray Blanchard, Mike Bailey, James Cantor, and others. Also, I have read many first-person narratives of autogynephilia, captured in works like Dr. Ann Lawrence's Men Trapped in Men's Bodies, and through personal emails and communications that people have sent to me because they've heard me talk about AGP on my YouTube channel. And lastly, of course, my clinical experience working individually with therapy clients and consulting with parents. All right, so from a sexology point of view, does Frank's description match up with the clinical literature on AGP? And again, I want to say I'm not an expert in this area, but I likely understand it far better than most people. So here's my take. I'll share a few points. Number one, the desire to become a woman, by some accounts, can emerge over time after escalating sexual experiences. It's possible. Often, however, males with AGP report some difficulty in their sexual relationships, or they might report more of an asexual orientation. Sometimes this is due to an incredible discomfort with their own maleness, their genitalia, or difficulty in assuming the male role during sex, particularly with regards to penetrating their partner. Autism may also play a role here. Now, Frank, on the other hand, had hundreds and hundreds of heterosexual encounters with women before he started fantasizing about becoming one. He did say that being fucked by a ladyboy was magical. So perhaps this receptive penetration sparked his desire to adopt a more feminine role in sexual encounters. Now, he also mentioned that he had taken home ladyboys before as well, indicating that he might have been attracted to feminized males. This is referred to as gynandromorphophilia in the sexology literature, GAMP for short, and this can be experienced by male-identifying men and also by men who cross-dress themselves or have AGP. Frank's fixation specifically on Asian girls is interesting, and I personally don't recall learning about any instances of autogynephilia that have this kind of ethnic specificity. Another unusual element in Frank's story is his desire to be fucked as a girl, but by himself specifically. Many AGPs derive both sexual gratification and psychological comfort from the idea of being the female in a sexual encounter. But they often describe their fantasies of being with a man as somebody faceless or very nonspecific. Now, this is termed pseudo-bisexuality. This is a little complicated, but stick with me here. The pseudo in this term refers to the fact that most autogynephiles are straight in their sexual orientation, not gay, and not really bisexual in the classic sense. I mean, they're attracted to females and to the female form, after all. So their interests in males exists predominantly because it validates and confirms that the autogynephile is the feminine one in the encounter, again, thus providing erotic gratification and psychological comfort. But wishing to be both the girl and the man in a sexual act is not something I've ever countered in any AGP narratives I've read. Lastly, the idea of having an Asian woman watch him during these encounters with men is very unusual. Many autogynephiles are supremely aware of their masculine physical traits and how they measure up to biological women. So this behavior of having a woman watch him might be better described as transvestic fetishism or some sort of voyeurism. Now, transvestic fetishism is when a man is aroused by cross-dressing as a man. While these two phenomena, AGP and transvestic fetishism, could be seen as similar, they operate quite differently. A true autogynephile would be more likely to hide himself, since he feels quite self-conscious about his maleness being recognized, whereas transvestic fetishism might lean towards more voyeuristic and socially disruptive behaviors. Now, all that said, it's entirely plausible that Frank's experience could fit into the category of autogynephilia, even with some of the discrepancies I just shared. In fact, many people have pointed to this scene and called it an example of AGP. But with all sexology labels or diagnoses, We have to remember these are words that we use and apply post hoc to categories of human experiences, so it can be messy. And also, definitions and diagnoses have a way of expanding and creeping into new conceptual areas over time. That's why generally, I find these labels useful, but I don't think they tell us the whole story. That being said, if a young man has these experiences, I think learning about AGP could offer him an alternative explanation beyond the born in the wrong body narrative that dominates conversations about things like identity and transition these days. But even here in this scene, we saw that Frank used a spiritual lens to make sense of his own desires and relate to his sexuality differently. Now, I know celibacy is pretty extreme, but then again, so is medical transition. And I believe there are many, many more ways that a person could navigate having this unusual sexual propensity. The last lens we'll put on today is the cinematic lens. Now, this is not exactly in my wheelhouse, but I was immersed in the White Lotus as an audience member and not as a therapist doing research on sexual confessions. And besides, I'm also getting a little bit of help because I got really curious about how much buzz I was seeing online about this monologue by Sam Rockwell, the actor. Apparently, this scene caused a bit of a stir, and you can obviously see why. I thought the YouTube comments were pretty entertaining, like this one. Director: Sam, the line was, "I moved here because I like the weather." Or this one: students are going to do this monologue in their acting classes for all of eternity. I loved seeing what the acting world had to say about this. And I also checked out some news stories about the scene. Let's look at one piece in the entertainment section of an Australian publication. The author, Christine Estera, starts off talking about Sam Rockwell, the actor, and how he's famous for playing villains in several different films, and saying that this recent monologue in The White Lotus left viewers scratching their heads. She highlighted some other online reactions too, and shared a few recent Twitter posts about the scene. I especially liked this one. In all seriousness, the Sam Rockwell monologue is unequivocally one of the most astounding, haunting, wild, daring, I don't even know if any of those words are right, moments in TV history. In one of my favorite lines of the piece, Estera says, "Indeed, as Rockwell delivered the monologue with a balance of madness and sorrow, Rick listened intently, but his facial expressions and nods of encouragement and reassurance are surely destined for meme territory." What I loved about falling into the cinema and acting rabbit hole is that it gave me such a fresh perspective. None of these people from the entertainment world have a clue about autogynephilia. But you know what? They don't necessarily need that term to understand at least some of what Frank was expressing here. For example, Leslie Bibb, who plays Kate on the show, pointed out that the monologue was instrumental for this season because they're focusing on themes like spirituality, death, doppelgangers, and mirrors. I just love the metaphorical and psychological lens she used there. Well, I hope you enjoyed the unusually explicit discussion today. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure you're subscribed to my Substack. That's the only place to get the rest of this month's newsletter. There I tell you about our first live and unfiltered event with Stella in the Gender a Wider Lens Substack. I share a little bit about part 2 of my conversation with Casey, who is a young woman who returned to her birth sex identity after getting caught up with trans at the young age of 11. I also share a very special book by Lisa Marciano and much, much more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.